Hi, everyone, and welcome to Complete Incast, the official podcast for Complete Inbox video games. This is episode 5. We are joined with Patrick Heinbaugh once again. Hi, Patrick. How you doing?
Good to be back.
It's been a crazy 15 minutes.
Oh, so crazy.
So this time, in the first episode, check out episode 4. We talked about just general state of comics and all that good stuff. And today we're going to ask the big question to Patrick.
Oh.
And it has to be asked. Marvel or DC?
I hate this question.
It's a question that must be asked. It's like Xbox or PlayStation.
I'm gonna phrase this and explain why I'm phrasing it this way. I prefer DC. I don't think one is better than the other, because it's just not fair. They're both very good publishers who do bad things, do good things, do things a lot similarly, really. And there's a misconception that they like hate each other, that they're always in competition. They're in competition with each other like any, major studio or whatever is, but they don't hate each other. They're actually very friendly with each other. But yeah, I read more DC. I know more DC, but I like Marvel a lot as well.
That's interesting to me. You bring up that they're very friendly with each other. Can you give specific examples of that?
Yeah, one of the most recent examples is, I believe a year or two ago, DC left New York forever, and we're just like, we're only going to be in Burbank, California now. They actually had offices in California and in New York, and they were pulled out of New York. And now, if you know Marvel, they are purely New York. They've been in New York for most of their lives. They might have some studios in California, especially with the movies, but primarily New York. And they actually sent a GIF on their Twitter website to DC saying, "We're going to miss you," with an image of Groot wiping away a tear from Rocket's eye from Guardians of the Galaxy, which is really sweet. And writers flip flop all the time, so writers are friends with each other no matter what. So there's a lot of good stuff there.
So you just mentioned something with writers flip flopping. Do writers sign short-term contracts with either, or are they just like kind of signed on just to do like a specific series, and then it would be crazy to me, it's like sports ball, right? Like ball. having someone play in the Yankees and go to the Red Sox. Yeah, it happens, but it's always like such a wow,
It's interesting, and it's changed a lot, especially with the state of writers in the industry. But a lot of writers now, they'll probably usually start indie, or they might start like even writing novels, but they really want to write comics. And then like Marvel's like, well, we've got this throwaway character who needs a book. You want to write this? Or DC will do the same thing. And if that book's popular enough, they can make like this know-nothing something, or a know-nothing character into like something popular. They'll give them something bigger and something bigger. And occasionally DC will just be like, hey, here's a contract, sign it immediately. But if like DC is just like, yeah, you're pretty good, but Marvel sees it and they're just like, hey, we got this nice comic waiting for you. You want to come over to us? They'll do it. However, that does change. Like, recent example is John Romita Jr., who was Marvel all the way. His father worked for Marvel. He worked for Marvel. He's an artist. Did Spider-Man for years. Went to DC because maybe his contract ran out and he wanted to try something new, or just he never had a contract and he wanted to try something new. I don't know the background of that. But, sometimes you just want to like, it's like, hey, I've done Spider-Man for all these years. Why not try Batman?
So that's a very common thing where you'll see someone on their resume have both Marvel and DC.
Yeah, I mean, Scott Snyder, who I said, he actually just signed a DC exclusive. He wrote that fan favorite Batman run. He had written some like just random things for Marvel for a little while because he didn't really have a in between. He wrote like an Iron Man noir story, which no one's ever really heard of. I just know he wrote it. I never read it. So he just did a couple things for Marvel until he's like, oh, I can do Batman now.
So if we're just dealing with the comic world right now, what are some strengths and I guess glaring weaknesses for each company?
DC's weakness recently just been relaunch after relaunch, and the New 52, I don't hate it as much as most people do, but they're definitely just like they took away so much legacy and so much great like characterization and years of great writing away. Fan favorite characters disappeared forever, and people felt missing. So now, with Rebirth, they've really reinvigorated the line, brought back those characters, brought back a lot of those storylines, and that's something great they're doing right now. And I hope they keep it up, because what they were doing was like destroying their legacy actively.
And Marvel
now is kind of doing the same thing. Marvel has had a very big diversity push recently, and I like diversity in comics. One of my favorite characters right now is Miles Morales. He's the African-American Latino Spider-Man. I like him more than Peter Parker right now because they're taking him back to a very familiar state of like high school and growing up, but with that twist of like his race. But Peter Parker's still around. You can still read his stories. But some people, they're just like, hey, Iron Man now is going to be a black female. And that's cool. I like that. I like how there's a black female Iron Man now, but Tony Stark's just kind of pushed off to the side. And what DC found themselves in a pinch in New 52 is they took away their legacy, and people didn't want to read these new stories because they weren't interested, because they wanted to see Bruce Wayne as Batman. They wanted to see a classic Superman. And people are going to want to see that Iron Man, and that chick might get her own comic book eventually, but Tony Stark's going to be Iron Man in 2 years. And that just sucks because a good character could be wasted now.
So you would say, instead of just creating another Iron Man, why not create another good character?
Exactly. And I don't have a problem with like a new character taking up an old mantle. It worked for Miles. It worked for Kamala Khan, the new Ms. Marvel. But like, give her own comic or have her be a supporting character and then get her own comic. Don't push her into this legacy. Make her own legacy. What Miles was able to do was they had an alternate universe. Peter Parker died in that universe. He took over. You can read their stories, and now they're together, and it's stronger than ever.
Well, it's legitimately a big shoes to fill kind of thing.
Exactly, and that's cool. But I've seen it a million times now, and now I don't really want to read it again.
Does anything in general have you excited for either company?
DC Rebirth.
You did mention the Rebirth.
Yeah, Rebirth has had me excited for a long time.
What about Marvel then?
Marvel doesn't really excite me right now. I'm still reading Spider-Man. Still reading Vision. I am excited for the new Jessica Jones book that's coming out. I read Alias is one of my favorite comic series of all time. So to see her get her own comic book again from the same creators is very exciting. But like, Civil War 2 sucks right now. It's not very interesting.
Let's go back just a second for the people that aren't super familiar with the comic book world. You mentioned Rebirth.
Yeah.
That is essentially starting the stories over.
No.
For each of them. That is not the case.
No. Rebirth is taking tenets of the pre-52 universe. New 52 was the reboot. New 52 was when they started the stories over and introduced a new world. This is the same world as the New 52. But basically they say, hey, elements have been tampered with from an outside force, and these elements are coming back. So you see returns of characters like Wally West. You see returns of classic characters. The pre-52 Superman is now the new Superman. It's all very confusing, but it's basically, here's the new stuff that you liked, and here's the old stuff that you like. We're putting them together so everyone can be happy.
And do you oftentimes see characters, because DC obviously owns all these characters like Batman being in a Superman comic kind of thing nowadays with that Rebirth? Because you mentioned that like there's this external force on the world. Is it like the same thing happening to everybody there?
Yeah. It was all explained in this like one-shot Rebirth special, which was really good. Of what it is. That it's actually The Watchmen. As I said, I think I've mentioned that in the last episode. It's my favorite comic of all time. They were originally like outside of the DC universe. Now they're apparently involved in it, and they're involved in this change. And like the first issue of Flash in Rebirth was like him and Batman investigating it. So it comes in, it comes out. That's what continuity is.
So it's new but old, but something that's to get excited for.
Yeah. Plus, like a lot of the Rebirth issues were just reintroductions to characters, and they're like, this is who Barry Allen is. He's the Flash, and these are going to be his adventures, and that's cool. And I like that they did those issues. Some people had a problem with them because they were too like redundant, but I'm like, not for people who were trying to pick this up for the first time.
Let's switch gears really quick and talk about indie developers or publishers. I was in video game mode there. Yeah. Now, I might have a different view on this, but I pretty much look at any indie publisher being anyone not named Marvel or DC. Do you look at that any differently? Or
no, more or less.
There's some major indie ones, IDW and Boom Comics and stuff like that.
The only thing I could think against that, or like as an outlier, is Vertigo Comics, because they're owned by DC.
Let's say that one doesn't count because they're owned by.
But they're not like in the same universe, and they do tell very similar stories to like Image. So
what is the general state of indie comics nowadays?
They're great right now.
Better than Marvel, DC in general.
Oh no, I'm not quality wise, but there's like compared to what they used to be, man. Image is like the third best. Like they're the third party, and they're still not ranking in like the amount of bucks they don't have to reckon.
Well, let's not even talk money. Let's just talk like quality. I pick a random new series that comes out from an indie publisher. I have a pretty good chance of it being at least somewhat decent. Is what you're saying now?
Not always.
It's still. I'd
say it's about the same as DC and Marvel. People like to prop indie comics up, and you can get a great indie comic that like transcends like what a good superhero comic book can be. I do admit that. But I mean, you can get a bad indie comic too, man. Like it doesn't matter.
Is there anything that indie comics can do that the big two cannot?
A lot of the time, they can tell a much more condensed story.
I've noticed that there's many more, like, we'll get a series in, and, you or Brad will tell me, oh, that's only 6. They create these characters, they tell it in 6 issues, and it's done. And then it's done, and then the characters, they're not used anymore.
That's exactly what I think an indie comic book should be, in my opinion. It should be it's almost like a book, but it's in that comics medium. Because, like, I'm not very into The Walking Dead. I don't think the story should go on for that long, because then you're just writing like what we've seen before in like superhero comic books.
It also seems that indie comics are able to be much more mature.
I was going to mention that, yeah, sex, violence, and not like
not
juvenile about
DC
it.
DC and Marvel, have stuff, but it doesn't. I don't think I've ever seen one where you just pick it up and you go, oh.
What Marvel did was they had this thing called the Max line in the early 2000s, and that's where Jessica Jones and like Luke Cage really came into play, where they could tell violent sexual stories told in the Marvel universe, which is interesting, but they don't really do that anymore. I don't know why exactly they got rid of that. Maybe people just didn't gravitate towards it, or people were too afraid of the Marvel universe being this dark. That was an interesting line. I'd like to see more like it.
So let's switch gears back to Marvel and DC, but let's talk about their other media, mostly movies and video games. Now, video games, I'm just going to import my opinion on this. I think in general, DC pretty much doesn't exist, with the exception of Batman.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
I completely
you had
agree.
to let me finish that right there. But
well, to be fair,
that being said, the Batman games are the best superhero games out there over the past 15, 20 years. So you have very little. You don't have many like Green Arrow or
I'd love to see
Suicide Squad, whatever. You have pretty much just Batman, but they are excellent. Whereas Marvel in general, once in a while will come on with a Hulk game or an Iron Man game, or the Spider-Man games once in a while, but they seem to be of varying quality. Some, like I heard the Amazing Spider-Man 1 was a very, very, very good game. But then there's other stuff where it's like just some random Spider game is like just terrible.
See, I would say it's very similar. I think Marvel, I mean, the Batman games are obviously the best ones, but Marvel, they only really care about Spider-Man in video games. Like,
recently,
you got your occasional Ultimate Alliances. Right. You got your occasional like X-Men games.
Less over the last couple of years. It seems it seems like they focus more on movies nowadays for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because they did a bunch of tie-ins to the original
which is interesting movies. Because Marvel comes out with all these huge movies and they don't come out with many game tie-ins. You don't see those much anymore.
They're starting. I think they focused on the movies for so long, but they're starting. That Spider-Man game that's coming out for the PS4 is kind of like the start of it. There's a rumored Telltale game they're doing. They announced it like 2 years ago, and there's nothing that's come out about it. I hope that hasn't fallen through, but it could have. But I think like if that Spider-Man game does good, I think they'll try more, because people are hankering for good Marvel games. They just they need to get the right developers, and they have to be good, or they'll just fall again.
So going to the movies then, what are some strengths and weaknesses for both Marvel and DC as we currently sit with their movie lineups?
Oh, DC has no strengths. They're just,
we're going to go into that.
They're a complete disaster right now. Marvel's strength is they got to it first, which has to be said. Doing that continuity on screen first,
and having that, I'm not super big into them, but having all those movies set up Avengers. Yeah. Whereas that's kind of what it seems DC's trying to do now with like Justice League. Yeah. Like, here's Batman, here's Wonder Woman, but you are correct. They definitely did that first.
They did it first, but also Marvel's thing is, one, they have a great producer, Kevin Feige. He is in charge of the whole thing. He's a great comic book fan, so he knows exactly what the audience wants, and he can make these films feel like they fit together. At the same time, they're also hiring talent that's extremely talented directors who normally you might not see this sort of thing. Like, if you told me James Gunn had been directing a Guardians of the Galaxy movie 2 years or 3 years ago, I would have called you insane. But it's one of their best
they're getting
films.
That talent
there. And they're just making good movies. That's what they're focusing on. The movies of Marvel, people are like to scoff at them, say they're like silly, but they're really well paced, really solid action, really solid character work, which people take for granted because there's so many of them, but there really hasn't been a truly awful Marvel movie.
So and you are absolutely correct on that, and I think a lot of that has to do with we'll get into that later. Disney owning Marvel now. When it comes to DC, you said there are not many strengths, or very little at all, when it comes to their movies. Why
Maybe 5 years
does DC nowadays like to mess with their finished products so much? And by that I mean it is a very famous tale that Batman vs. Superman, and there's even the Ultimate cut for it out nowadays, where it was pretty much finished, and then they changed it. And they did the same thing for Suicide Squad, where I haven't seen it yet. I'm about to see it on Monday, but everyone says it's clear they had something, and then they dismantled it. It's building that big bookshelf and then taking it apart and going, I only want pieces of wood on the floor.
Yeah, 2 stories there. I'm going to condense them real quick. Batman v Superman, they just made too much of a movie. Like, it was going to be 3 hours, and they just took scenes out. It happens. It happened to Age of Ultron to less disastrous results, but it does happen. But Batman v Superman was the downfall of Suicide Squad. What happened with Suicide Squad is, A, they wrote the movie in 6 weeks, so it wasn't going to be good to begin with, but it would have been better. It was supposed to be a much darker film. It was going to be like... David Ayer's a crime writer, so it was going to be a crime fiction film pretty much, but with supervillains, which is interesting. I'd like to see the real version of that. But then that trailer came out with Bohemian Rhapsody in it, and everyone this looks fun. This looks like Guardians of the Galaxy. And this was also after Batman v Superman came out, and everyone's like, that movie's so dark and depressing. And they're like, whoa, this isn't what this film actually is. So they got the guys who cut that trailer to cut the film, and they had never cut a film before. And you can tell because that movie is a mess. It doesn't flow as a film. The pacing's all off.
And that's so frustrating when a big company goes off of... I use the term focus groups lightly, but, you know...
It's focus groups.
Essentially, focus groups say, we don't like this. Oh, well, change it. Change the whole thing, then.
They're crapping their pants because they lost to Marvel. And they're trying to catch up to a race they've already lost when they should just be trying to keep a pace.
If this can be answered quickly... what can DC do in the near future to write their movie franchises?
They either have to do a very soft reboot where they basically just pretend that the past 3 films haven't happened because nobody likes them and nobody wants to hear about them anymore.
What about something like Nolan's Batman? Like that, everyone enjoyed that, right? So
yeah.
Something like that.
Singular stories. I think what they need to do is just stop, think about what they're doing, give it a year or 2, and then start like what Marvel did. Have a Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman movie, maybe all in production at the same time if they have enough talent on hand and money to pay for it. Have those movies work towards something, instead of just being like, hey, here's Batman and here's Superman and here's Wonder Woman. You know nothing about them, but they're in this film together, so go watch it.
Let's quickly go over to the biggest train wreck of all. And my question for you is, why... I think this is a very leading question. Why should Sony just give up the Spider-Man movie rights and go away forever?
They kind of have already, actually. Amazing Spider-Man 2 is my least favorite superhero movie. I hate it.
That was a question I was going to.
Yeah, no, I hate that movie. There are worse superhero movies for sure, but that's the one that just got under my skin the most. But that movie failed. It flopped. They really mismarketed it. They really lost a lot of money on it. So they've already given half the rights over to Marvel. And Marvel's they're like, we have Spider-Man. We are willing to drag your corpse with us as long as we can make a good film out of it. And Spider-Man Homecoming looks great, so I don't think Sony will give it up because they'll make money off these films, but they basically already have. We've won. Homecoming looks great. He was great in Civil War. I'm not concerned about it anymore. That's the least of my problems. My problem's DC right now.
So going to good stuff then very quickly before we finish up. Do you think that the acquisition of Marvel by Disney, it's been several years now, was overall a good or a bad thing? Let's just say just for their movies at this point.
Yeah, it's bad for the comics, but that's a whole other thing. Good for the movies, for sure.
Would you rather it be good for the comics and bad for the movies?
No, not really. I don't read Marvel comics that much anymore, and it's nice to have, I go to DC a lot because I don't get that quality in the movies, so I have quality in comics. And Marvel, I don't say I'd have disquality in comics. They're doing fine. But I have a lot of quality in the movies. So I get those 2 universes in different mediums, and I really enjoy it that way.
Disney for me will always be a love-hate relationship.
Yeah,
I watch these Marvel movies, and there is nothing inherently wrong with them, right? Absolutely not. They are well put together. It's almost like you take a very well-crafted machine that you put ideas in, and it spits out something that is utterly competent, beautiful, and cool to look at, and whatever. But then you leave it thinking, you leave it, and then months later, nothing's resonating with you, right? So I just feel every Marvel movie, and including, please do not, unlike this page or anything like that, Star Wars: The Force Awakens, I watched it. It was very enjoyable. It was good. It was very pretty. But I'm trying to remember now, and I paid attention the whole time. Wasn't on my phone for 1 second. I'm trying to remember many scenes from it, and it's I don't, because I just feel this stuff is it's like it's almost like a beautifully worked focus group, and they put out this like picture perfect stuff that you don't remember. But I have nothing like, oh my gosh, and I don't mean to, you know, fantasize this movie more than it is, but in The Dark Knight, when, you know, like Joker does anything, like is like riding around, it's such a short scene, but when he's riding around in Gotham with his like head out of the car, just like licking his lips and stuff like that, like I'll always remember that, but I don't remember very much at all from these Marvel movies.
The thing that I will tell you about that is The Dark Knight's probably the best comic book film of all time, in that it's an amazing film, and it didn't even have to have Batman.
It didn't have to be
a comic book.
Batman it was just a film.
But
right.
what the Marvel movies do, and I'll go back to The Force Awakens. I agree with you. I saw that movie twice in theaters. I can't think of anything about it right now.
Right, but it was good, and you didn't leave it going. You didn't leave it going. It was bad.
I was all about it when it came out.
It just Disney does that. I've seen Frozen because of my son Ferris like 5,000 times.
Sure, yeah.
But like besides the major story arcs and stuff,
Zootopia is actually way better. Zootopia stays with you.
Really,
that movie's amazing.
I'm sure that there's some, but in general, the stuff I see, it's like
I think Marvel, since there's so many of them, there are times where I am stuck by.
That could be true. I mean,
Civil
when they
War
come out every 2-3 months.
Yeah, I think Civil War is incredible, but I don't think I'm going to remember Doctor Strange after I see it. I think I'm going to like it, but I don't think I'm going to be like, this is incredible. Civil War was incredible. Avengers was incredible. They can do it. And I think Episode 8 is actually going to be incredible.
It's
the talent they have on that film is going to make a very
It's hard to
film.
explain to a person that you like something, but you don't like it's like, because you weren't offended in any way that you don't like it. Like Star Wars Episode 7, what do you think about it? It was good, but it wasn't memorable. I mean, what do you mean? It was so good and so polished and so pretty that like, whatever, you know, like
I think in our lives we've come upon so many Empire Strikes Backs, like just an incredible experience that will never be beaten by anything. That's hard to find that experience again.
You know, that is true. I mean,
like I haven't had like Civil War is probably my favorite film of the year, give or take. I kind of forget what I've seen this year to say. But it's not like going to be one of my favorite films of all time.
I mean, I haven't seen many of them, but still, The Dark Knight for me is the last one where, like, if we're talking just comic book movies, of being like, whoa, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I'll remember that. I want to see that all the time. Like, it was just, you know, wow.
I watched. I'll buy Civil War on Blu-ray, but it's like Force Awakens when like it came out on Blu-ray. I wanted to get it. I was like, I don't really want to spend $20 on this. It was good, but it's not worth like watching over and over again.
And that's
I feel that.
And that's a first world problem right there. Us complaining about something that was
that was
well
that
made.
I actually really liked
good.
it.
I liked it, but I just not enough to like go around quoting it or whatever. You know,
I couldn't tell you a line in that movie.
Right, exactly. But I guess that's what happens. I mean, Marvel comes out with what at this point 4, 5, 6 movies a year. You know, depending. Only 2.
They're going to start doing 3 towards like the end of Phase 3.
I guess it just seems
this year it's just Civil War and Doctor Strange.
I guess it just seems like more for some reason. I don't know.
Here's the thing: like when a Marvel movie comes out, everyone raves about it, everyone loves it.
That's true. You
just hear about it a lot. You think it's more.
Hear about it. That's why on a couple days from now, when I go see Suicide Squad, I'm going to be sitting there going, "Oh yeah, this is going to be bad." I'm going to remember every single thing about this.
Yeah, it's like when I got out of Batman v Superman, I was so pissed because it was so bad, and like everyone had told me it, but I'm like, it could be good. But Suicide Squad, I'm just like, I know what I'm in for. Let's just do it. And I wasn't mad. It was whatever.
All right, thank you guys for listening to Completing Cast Episode 5. We ranted about Marvel, DC, and movies in general.
Yeah.
Go buy Suicide Squad on Blu-ray.
Don't do that.
By the time
you've probably already seen it in theaters, but don't do it. You're wasting your money.
By the time you're watching this, buy it, rent it, do all that.
If you liked it, that's fine, but probably not.
Thanks again, guys.